thank you for being here. And this is a very important topic to us, something we're super passionate about. We talk about it in a lot of different ways. We have a lot of webinars that we do, and hopefully this one's got some new information that you may not have seen before. So let's jump right in. So for those that don't know me, my name is, like I said, Curtis Hughes. I'm one of the managing partners and co-founders here of C5 Insight, and I've been working in the collaboration space for a very long time, over 15 years. I've been actually working with SharePoint since '99. It actually wasn't even called SharePoint then. It was pre-beta called Site Server, and then it kind of came. So I've been around the SharePoint world a long time, speak at conferences and do things like that. And we're super passionate, not just about the technology, and that's what this session is going to be about, is more about how to get more from the tool, because hopefully that's why you guys are here. And not going to be a technical session. My sessions are more focused on some of the business value around them, so you guys can hopefully take some things back and learn from that. On the screen, you can see my info here. Feel free to connect with me on Twitter, LinkedIn, email me. Would love to connect with you for sure, and you can find out more about me. If you're doing any kind of social sharing, and we certainly would love for you to do that and want you to do that. Here's my handle, our C5 Insight handle on Twitter. A couple hashtags you can use for this session, and we'd love for you to take screenshots, tweet, share. Don't feel shy if you do that kind of thing. Feel free to mention things you might see, and some of them will have this little Twitter icon in the top right corner that may be tweet worthy. Before we jump right in and kind of get to the agenda and what we're going to talk about, I want to see if we can bring up a poll here and just kind of get an idea of where everybody is on their journey, because we know everybody's in different places along the way. So I'd just like to see for a second where you guys are in your journey with SharePoint. So just take a couple minutes to fill that out. Again, hopefully I've covered the majority of things there. I know it's probably not everything, but hopefully the majority there. So fill that out. Let's get a feel for where everyone is, and that'll help me as I go through this to know kind of who I'm talking to and what you guys are struggling with.
We're currently at just under 50% of people voted, now over 50%. So if you've navigated away from the screen, if you'll rejoin us for one quick second, fill in your answer, and we will go back into today's webinar. Looks like just about everybody has voted, so I'm going to go ahead and close out this poll and share the results for you, Curtis.
Yep, perfect.
And we will share where people are today.
So just so you guys can see on the screen, here we are, and you can see that about 10%, which is, I don't know if that's surprising to me or not, but 10% don't have SharePoint but looking to do it, so that's great news. About 55%, about what I expected for having one of the older versions of SharePoint, looking to go to 13 or 16, and then a little over 30% that forget about version, our SharePoint is struggling, and that's really what this session is most about. 31% is lower than the norm, and I'll talk about that in a minute. So good job on that. I think that's good, and that helps me with who's here. So appreciate you guys taking a minute. So let's continue on with this, and we'll jump right back in. So I've got some bad news and I've got some good news, and I'll start with the bad news first. Get that out of the way, and then I'll talk about the good news. The bad news is, and this is why I said it was nice that only 30% are struggling. The bad news is about 63% of all SharePoint projects are struggling, stalled, or simply flat out fail to meet expectations. And what's interesting about this is this is an AIIM stat, so you can go out there and find that. This is actually a 2015 stat, so this one just came out in the last 9 months, 8 or 9 months or so, I think February. And what's interesting about this, and the reason we do these type of sessions, is that in 2013, this exact same study and this same stat was 61%. I used to have 61% on my slide deck, and recently increased that to 63%. So failure rate and struggles and stalls are going up while our technology is actually getting better. So wouldn't you think that, as technology gets better, more sophisticated, we got all these things going on, that we're going to get better at using these things? And it actually hasn't happened that way. So that's the bad news. The bad news is 63% of these are going to struggle. So for those of you that in that 55% or that 10% that are going to upgrade or are looking to do SharePoint, the odds are stacked against you. Now that's the bad news. And before you kind of close out your webinar and say, forget it, I'm not doing this, the good news is that we now know the reasons why. And C5 Insight has spent a ton of time, and myself personally has spent a ton of time trying to understand why are these things struggling. There's a ton of people out there in the industry that are really trying to understand why these things are happening with technology. And we think we found a lot of the core things, and I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go on. So don't fear. Failure is normal. Everybody's going to go through the struggles. We've taken a lot of clients through struggles and turned them around and helped them as they get ready to go. And I'll talk through all that as we go through it. And so what we're going to talk about today are really three areas. We're going to touch on one area that I'm calling the uncontrollables. I realize that's not a real word, but the things that you really can't control, but they're going to impact your project. And so we're going to talk about those because it's, in this case, ignorance is not bliss, right? And then we're going to talk about the disconnect, where organizations are really struggling with SharePoint, where they're falling down, and I'm going to talk through some areas there. And then, like I like to do in most of my sessions, I'll spend the last 10, 15 minutes or so talking about, all right, we've seen all these things. Now, how do I turn this around? What's a better way to go about this? And hopefully have some practical things that you guys can take away and say, all right, we need to start thinking a little bit differently about this. So with that said, let's jump right in and start talking about some of these uncontrollables. So really where this came from in this section of this webinar is really that things going on around us, and we're seeing it more and more and more, things going on around us in the world are impacting collaboration and SharePoint. And honestly, some of these things you really can't do anything about. So the first question may be, well, why the heck talk about them? Why spend time talking about them? But like it or not, these uncontrollable things do affect the way we work, and ignoring them and not talking about them is not going to make them go away, right? So I've got a 3-year-old, soon to be 4-year-old, and I can tell you that when he throws a temper tantrum, ignoring it and hoping it goes away does not work for me in the long run. That's not a good strategy. And the same thing's true here, right? So we need to talk about them because whether you like it or not, they're going to impact your SharePoint success. And so, you know, we like to say we're brutally honest, and that's kind of what this session is bringing this up and saying, hey, here's some things you're going to be up against. Better to know them now than to run into them down the road, because if you know them, then you can have a strategy for how to navigate that, and that's what we're going to talk about today. So they're going to affect you, and we're going to talk about what those things are. So how many of you guys would say, that are seeing this on the screen, how many of you would say, yeah, this is me? I've got a meeting I just came from, I've got to call a client back, I got a meeting I got to run to next, I got 200 open emails that I haven't responded to and 14 voicemails, and my voicemail box is full, right? We got all these things going on, and we've got this information overload kind of taking place in our world today, and it's not getting any better. You know, we got the new iPhone and all that kind of stuff coming out that we heard about yesterday, and all the new things, and things are growing. I mean, we're so connected, and you guys can see the stats on the screen with the interruptions and how many times we check email and how many meetings, and we're just bombarded. And on the surface, it actually looks like this is collaboration, right? But in our mind, this is not collaboration. This is chaos, right? This is madness, because it's preventing us from actually doing the things we need to do. It's bombarding us, and there's so many stats out there. I could go on and on with how much time we spend in these meetings and not just have the meetings. And I think it's upwards of 20+ hours a week that we spend either looking for information, email, something like that. So we're not getting a whole lot of stuff done, but on the surface, it sure looks like we're collaborating. So understanding how people are responding to this information overload and actually how it's changing you, me, the people that are going to use SharePoint, understanding that is really important, because we can no longer just kind of throw SharePoint at it, put SharePoint, put any one of these tools out there, Yammer, whatever it may be, put these out there and just hope that it works, that people just start collaborating, that it's quote-unquote intuitive and people know how to use it. So it's pretty interesting. There was a study that Microsoft partnered with another firm, I can't remember the other firm, and did a study and actually came out and said for the first time ever in history, humans have a shorter attention span than a goldfish, and they attributed it back to all this information overload. It is, and it's pretty sad. Our attention span has dropped 25% as humans in the last 10 years, in the last decade. So it's amazing how with you know, tweets at 140 characters and text messages, we send more of those than emails these days, and news feeds and all these inputs coming in. It's actually changed our brain and how we're processing things. And quite frankly, I'm surprised any of you guys are actually even still on this webinar, still listening to me with that kind of attention span, right? So it's pretty amazing. But as you guys are attempting to start a new SharePoint project, you're struggling with SharePoint, understanding these things is important. And I know sometimes you say, well, what can I do about that? We can, if we know about it, we can put in strategies to say, you know what, people don't want a whole bunch of information on the internet homepage. That's just one example. They don't want a whole bunch of words. We need to give them small nuggets that they can consume, you know, Maybe it looks like the iPhone interface. Maybe it looks like the Windows tiles, whatever it is. But just understanding how we process information will go a long way in the success of your SharePoint. And that's the thing I want to tie together. The next thing is that you guys probably are not even, some of you probably not even in your office right now listening to this. You may be at a coffee shop, you may be at home, you may be working remote somewhere. And it's pretty crazy how fast telecommuting growth has grown. And so we're working in a new way right now, right? We're working differently, a lot of different things going on with how we're working, mobile phones, we're all mobile, we've got phones, we check most of our stuff on mobile phones or tablets or something like that. So a lot of things going on with people outside the office, and you guys can see some of the stats here on the screen. But I bring this up to say we're changing the way we work, right? We're changing the way we work, and so these things, again, like it or not, are going to impact how you communicate, connect, collaborate with people in your organization. SharePoint is the tool that can help with that, and that's why you guys are here. But at the same time, you need to understand that I can't just put these in place. I need to make sure I'm catering to this, that 50% of my workers are not even going to be in the office. Well, that's going to change a strategy for sure, right, in the next 5 years. So it's definitely a new way of working. We're part of a new generation of working these days. And so the last thing I want to talk about is really this generational shift. And most of you guys have probably seen or heard articles on kind of the rise of the millennials, and it's out there now and been out there for a long time. And it's true, you guys can see the stats on the screen here. I mean, we're making this huge shift, and probably in the next 4 or 5 years, we're going to have a majority of the workforce made up by millennials. And so why does that matter? Well, millennials are different than boomers, than Gen X, and all these other generations, right? So as more of these come in, it's kind of like pouring in, new water or dirty water into a clean bucket, right? It's gonna change the makeup of the water. It's going to change the makeup of your organization. So the actual DNA and sometimes the culture of your organization can certainly change as you start getting more millennials and as you start getting these new generations in there. So that is certainly going to change how people use the tools that you give them. So knowing that, hey, we can't build this like 1996 or even 2000 or even 2013, right? We've got to build this looking forward and looking at the ways that people are working, and we're working all over the place, and we want to listen to music while we're working and all kinds of crazy things. And so a couple stats there on the side is that a third of millennials are leaving for money, which means that 2/3 are leaving for some other reason. And we've seen a lot of people start working really hard, and one of the things I work a lot with our clients on is employee engagement. And we've seen SharePoint and these tools help with engagement, and help with retention, and help with hiring and all these things. But it's interesting to know that people aren't leaving because they're throwing more money at them. They're leaving, a lot of times we've seen them leave because the tools are antiquated, and they want to work with the cutting edge and bleeding edge. And what do you mean I can't access my email without going on a VPN? Are you crazy? And we've seen people actually not be able to hire younger generations because of the technology and the way they're kind of doing things. So these things are going to matter. They're leaving after a short amount of time. They're only leaving after about 3 years. So just enough time, right, to come into the organization, learn the ropes, gain some knowledge, and then walk out the door with that. So how can we make sure, if we know that this generation is 2/3 are leaving for something else and they're leaving after 3 years, how do we make sure we're capturing knowledge into a system such as a SharePoint or something else to have knowledge management? So if that knowledge doesn't walk out the door, we call this sometimes a knowledge gap. And we did some ROI for a client recently that showed a huge multi-hundred thousands of dollars that they were going to lose as information and knowledge walked out the door because they weren't capturing it. It was just leaving, and they were having to relearn, retrain, or even sometimes recreate knowledge. And then the last thing is, about the time that millennials are making up the majority, we're going to have a 5th generation entering the workforce. And some are saying that for the first time in history, we'll have 5 generations because people are living longer, they're working longer, and they're staying in the workforce longer. And now we have this 5th generation, Gen Z or Gen 2020, that will be coming into the workforce. So I can tell you that when you have a 55, 60-year-old that's working with your organization and a 22, 23-year-old coming out of college, throwing SharePoint in the middle is not going to solve the problem of those two individuals working together, right? And we see that time and time again. They work differently. So how do I create an environment, create a platform, create a safe place where these people can work the way they're used to working, but also collaborate in the same way? And so there's a lot of psychology. I've got another session called the Human Factor. You can find it out on our YouTube channel or out there, and it talks a lot more about this kind of stuff. The whole hour is about the psychology and why you need to be thinking about that. But I'll leave it with that, with some of these uncontrollables about, hey, these things are happening. What can you do about them? Not really much, but it's important to know that they're going on in your organization. So as we shift gears now and kind of talk about the next section that I want to go through, I want to spend a few minutes, and really about 15, 20 minutes in the next section, talking about 6 specific areas where we see this disconnect manifesting itself in today's organization. And so we'll talk through these 6 areas, and then as we come back at the end, like I said, I'll try to show you how we can think differently as we go forward. But before we jump into those 6 areas, what I want to do is just spend 1 minute talking about where this session and where this came from, and really to say we didn't make this stuff up, right? So for our organization, about 4 or 5 years ago, we noticed a trend, and a lot of you guys that have worked with us and seen some of my other sessions have probably seen this slide. But it helps to know that, hey, this isn't stuff we've just kind of made up and thrown these up there. This stuff is happening. And today, about 60% of our work is this rescue, this CPR work. Organizations that are coming to us in that 30-something%, sometimes even more, they're saying, hey, I got my hand raised, we did this, but man, nobody's using it. It's been out there a year and it's just fizzled out, and they just abandoned it. People are using Dropbox, whatever it may be, and people just coming to us saying, hey, we need help. We got it in place. We thought it was great. We have all the bells and whistles, but nobody's using it, or we're just struggling. It didn't meet our expectations. So about 60% of our new business and proposals going out the door today are with organizations failing. And so that's where this comes from. I mean, we want to spend time understanding these things, and that's why these free webinars, we do those all the time, and we speak all over and blog, just to help you guys try to not go through these same things. Hopefully you guys can learn from the mistakes of others and go through this. So the first thing I want to talk about that many of you guys may have heard and maybe thinking about is organizations having unclear roadmap or unmeasurable goals. And there's a lot behind this. I'll talk more about it as we go through, but this is a biggie because, you know, as you start your project, it's important to know what done looks like, is what we often say internally. I mean, Covey always said, you know, begin with the end in mind, and knowing where you're going and where I want to end up. And along the way, what are my milestones, and is it measurable? How do I know if I'm done? How do I know when I get to December 31st, 2015, that we're finished with phase X, and what are the boxes that I need to check? And a lot of people don't think to that detail. And how do you know when you met those goals? And if you are struggling, like 30-something% said they are, if you don't have a roadmap and know what, you know, the path and the map you're on, how do you know how to get back on that path? If I'm off the path, if I don't have a map, how do I get back on it, right? So having that helps you when you do start struggling and say, hey, we're off track here. You know, we need to get back on track. And so one of the examples I love is organizations will say, hey, we need a new intranet. And the first question I ask is, why do you need an intranet? What does intranet mean to your organization? Is intranet a push only where marketing pushes out content and you receive it? Is it interactive? What is the goal of the intranet? Why do you want it? Does it need to be accessed externally? And start just asking those questions, but a lot of people just start with this very high level, what is an intranet, or we need an intranet, and not understanding, well, what is that intranet going to solve? Why are we actually doing that intranet? So a lot of things here, and I'll talk more about this as we go through. One of the examples I always love to show is kind of this one. So everybody knows what this is, right? This is a project plan, a Gantt chart on the screen. And this is actually a real phase 1 project plan. I know I've got some collapsed tasks here as well, but this is a project plan that we had for a client back in the spring. And this is a real project plan. So it doesn't look huge, right? Even if I expanded it, it wouldn't be super, super huge with the task at this level. But this is how people start. They go out, they gather a few requirements, they get some requirements going, they put some punch lists in here and put it on a map. What we found is that what actually looked and started like a project plan on a Gantt chart actually looks more like this. And so what it ends up being is hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of decisions across the entire life of the project. So no longer is it 15, 20, 50 tasks. It's 2, 3, 4, 500 decisions that need to be made. And some of these tasks overlap 10, 15 decisions, and some of these tasks intertwine and dependent on each other. And a lot of these decisions, most probably, are not specific to technology. They're decisions about, well, all right, if we develop this, who's going to use it? And are they going to use it the same way this other person is going to use it? And how are we going to do training on that? And how are we going to make sure people are using it? And those are the questions you should be asking. So part of this is to start to think a little more strategically about SharePoint, and not just, hey, I got to go get some requirements from my group and put this out there. There's a lot of things going on behind the scenes, and we've actually found across our projects there's anywhere from 2 to 3 decisions per $1,000 of labor costs. So easy math, let's say you spend $100,000 you want to invest in a project. with a firm or however you want to measure that, $100,000, there's at least 200 to 300 individual decisions that have to be made per that $100,000, 200 to 300. So there's a lot of decisions going on. So I like to paint this picture just to show that it is more than you think it is. It needs more attention, and it needs to be a little more strategic. And the last thing I want to kind of show on this is really talking a little bit more about some of the stats here. And again, I like to show stats because they say, hey, this isn't from C5, right? This is what others are saying about the same thing that we're seeing. But you guys can read these on the screen here about, making sure we have strategic plans, making sure that we even know how to measure our progress, and how do we even know what we're accomplishing, and then being specific. A lot of it goes back to the last one, the 75%. I mean, what is an intranet? We need document management. A lot of people say we need document management. You know how many different things that means to different people? So making sure that we get very specific and communicating, and we'll talk about communication later with the out-of-sync stakeholders, communicating with your stakeholders on here's what we actually need to build, and this is why, and here's what we're going to do. So a roadmap, a vision, where are we going, where are we going to end up, and pointing our car, so to speak, in that right direction. I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go on. The second one that's pretty big as well that we see, and really all of these, I mean, these 6 are all going to be big. I'll probably say that about every single one, is unrealistic expectations, and organizations just having this unrealistic view of what to expect. And we struggle with this all the time, whether it's a financial thing that, hey, they have the budget of X, and to do what you want to do is really going to cost Y, but more even than budget, it's just expectations on how the process is going to go and what they can expect out of it. And we all know that when we set our expectations really high, we're almost always disappointed, right? We come in under always. So they always say, lower your expectations a little bit, or just understand. And some things we usually hear are, well, this is going to make us so much more productive right away. Let's put this in place. Let's go to 365, and we have it all integrated, and we've got Delve and Yammer and our link and Exchange and everything right there. Or you get it implemented, and people are like, well, this is the old way was so much more comfortable for me. I developed the old way, and I spent so much time. I got it all to work, and it was working perfectly. And now you want me to learn this new way? How do I get my head around doing this new way? And people resisting change and things like that. And there's a whole bunch of reasons. Maybe part of one of my favorite is, we got very smart technical people. They can learn anything. I think if you guys just come in here and give us about a half day of training, we'll be good to go on our SharePoint implementation. And that's always one of my favorites. And I'll talk about training a little later on as we close out the webinar. But just having the right expectation of how this is going to go. So I've come up with kind of a scenario here, and I want to talk through how this might look and see if this makes sense for you guys. So most organizations grow over a period of time, right? You didn't just start out by having all these very sophisticated systems one day. Most organizations start where they deal with the realities of the landscape, and kind of like you see on the left side here, this footpath, they start cutting away through this mountainside, through this countryside, and as they grow, they found the process that didn't scale very well. Yeah, we can get there, but we can't go very fast. The footing's a little unstable. We can't go. Sometimes there's issues with our Excel spreadsheets that are breaking down and linking, and something's breaking. It's just not scaling very well. So they start envisioning this automation and wow, SharePoint and all these tools, and it's going to make us so much better. And so they think that this little curvy, narrow path is going to become this super highway. We're going to be collaborating in team sites. Oh my goodness, OneDrive for business and Delve. We'll be able to see what everybody's got going on. But it never, ever, ever works this way, right? So that arrow there is just where people think they're going to jump from this footpath to this super highway. And so they start looking for shortcuts, and a lot of times looking for technology specifically that they can put in place that's going to solve their problems really quickly. And they look, and especially these days with so much awesome technology, they're looking for these quick fixes, things that we can put in place. And 365 makes it easy. Trust me, we love it. We're on 365. We use that ourselves. It makes it easy. Just turn it up, put your credit card in, whatever it is, and you're on, right? And so what we've got to be careful of is trying to throw something at it and not understanding, we've got this footpath, how do we actually transform that? How do we pave that? How do we put up the guardrails? How do we make that right for the superhighway? So when we try to pave over this well-worn path, this footpath, what a lot of organizations end up with is what we're looking at here in kind of this paved footpath, right? It's a little wider, it's a little less curvy. You can get your footing on it, but it's definitely not a super highway, right? We're still cutting this through the woods here, and we're still trying to make our way. And the truth is, it takes a lot of careful planning to go from that footpath to that super highway. And so what we often see and what we actually look for is something that looks more like this. This is actually a very healthy sign of a good project and that's going well. You have construction, right? If any of you guys in your cities, I'm sure you have these construction barrels and everything out there. Highway projects are a perfect example, right? We've got highway projects going on all the time, and they manage it in phases. They block off this lane so that they can pave this one, and then they move the lanes over, and then they pave the other lane. And so it's very similar with SharePoint. It's amazing how we see such a disconnect, but it's very true where if you're going to do this, you're going to have to go through this construction phase and setting the expectations of, hey, you know what, guys, things may slow down just a little bit before they speed up. That's kind of where the expectations come from. Things are going to slow down a little bit before they speed up. And so the key here with this is not to get stuck in construction, right? Not to make it an ongoing 20-year project where you're stuck with barrels out on the side of the highway. To move through this, to get through it, but to let people know that, hey, as we build this, it's going to come. And I'll talk a little bit more about how we communicate that a little later on. So it kind of leads us perfectly into the next item I want to talk about, which is top of my list, and this is focusing on the tools. And we see so many organizations doing it time and time and time again, focusing on exactly that, just taking the tool like a SharePoint, and a lot of you guys have SharePoint already, and I know I'm talking to you, so you may be saying, hey, we've already got SharePoint, we've already addressed it, I'm already using it, so how do I not focus on the tools? How do I focus on this? And what I mean by that is just not looking at SharePoint to kind of solve the problem, but reframing your mindset to say, what are some of the other things we're actually trying to solve with this? So the best analogy I have, and I love this analogy, and I think it helps a lot of people kind of get it, is, you know, Saturday morning you wake up and there's a lot of projects around the house. I've got a huge honey-do list, right? So you go out and you grab a hammer from your garage, and then I just start walking around the house or the yard and saying, what can I hammer on today? What I need to find something to hammer on. So you walk over to your neighbor's house and say, hey, Bob, I got a hammer. I need, how should I use this hammer today? What should I hammer on? And you guys chuckle, but it's what we hear. We have organizations coming to us and saying, hey, I got SharePoint. Now, can you tell us what other clients are doing? How do I use this? What do I need to do with it? Yeah, we could share documents. We got file shares now. Show me how to do it. And that's very similar to how we do it. So, you know, never once have I seen my hammer do all my chores for me without understanding. So the right way to go about that is, all right, what do I have to do? I've got a leaky faucet. I've got a nail sticking out, whatever it is. And then you go to your garage and you grab the tool that is best equipped to solve that problem. And so it's for us, it was a light bulb when that went off, and I kind of came up with that analogy and said, that's really what people are doing. They're taking these tools, walking around and saying, how do I solve these problems? And we want you just to basically lay down the tool for a second, try to figure out the problem it's going to solve, and then go back and figure out which tool out of SharePoint, because SharePoint's a whole toolbox, right? We agree with that. So which tool out of this toolbox is going to help me solve the problems that I've got within my organization? And so I hate to burst your bubble, but if we're being honest, none of you guys are here because it's about a SharePoint project. You're not here because you're doing a SharePoint project, right? It shouldn't be about SharePoint. It never really has been about SharePoint. And the truth is, it's really about organizing our information, helping people come together, discovering what we've got, making new innovations, sharing information, capturing knowledge, protecting knowledge, all those kind of things. And you can see them all up on the screen. So again, part of that reframe is, hey, it's not about SharePoint. Let's get SharePoint and see what we can do with SharePoint. Let's do a quote-unquote SharePoint project. What are we trying to solve? And that's really the point I want to get across here is, what are we trying to solve? What are we trying to do? Are we trying to increase employee engagement? Are we trying to make customer service so they can turn around things a lot faster? They can view customer files. What are we trying to do? And that's really where this comes from. And the last thing I want to share on this comes from a study, and you guys can, it's down in the bottom corner, it might be hard to see, but you guys can go out there and Google this. It's a paper and a research project done by Gartner, Carol Roswell, and I'll show a couple other pieces from this as well. But this is one excerpt from that paper, and it basically talked about how we said 63% from the AIIM study, but they have as high as 80% of these social and collaboration business efforts, such as SharePoint, are not going to achieve their intended benefits because of, one, inadequate leadership, and we'll talk a little bit about that, and the biggest one, overemphasis on technology. Spending all the time focusing on the technology. How are we going to do it? What technical pieces do we need? What workflow technology? What add-ins do we need? What migration technology? And not on how are we going to go about this. So with that said, if we're not focusing on the tools, then what should we focus on? And in our mind, you should shift your focus around to the people. And I put forgetting about the people because that's what organizations are doing. They're forgetting about people and forgetting that people are at the heart of every single SharePoint project, right? People always have been and always will be. And somewhere along the way, we kind of lost our way and forgot why we were doing these things. We started building them because the technology is cool, but at the end of the day, we're not building it and spending this money just to have a checkbox checked. I hope that's not why you're doing it. And you'll probably hear me say this over and over again before the session's finished, but without people using your quote-unquote awesome SharePoint or all these cool tools, all you have is a tool that's gathering dust, and nobody uses it, and nobody wants to use it, and you know, your project is a failure, right? And so what we want is people to use this, and so start asking questions, and I'll talk about this a little bit more when we talk about how to get out of this. But in this piece, I just wanted to share kind of one of these ways that people are not focusing on people. But start asking questions like, what do people need to do their jobs better? What are they really struggling with? What complaints do I hear? Who should we get involved with this project? Who are the right people to have on the project team? Do we have buy-in, or is this just something that IT wanted to do, or that someone wanted to do? So people, right? That's what I want to get across. People are who it's for. People are who make it happen. And so if you remove the people equation, you really don't have any project whatsoever. So again, in this piece, I want you guys to start thinking. We need to start thinking about people. How do people respond to SharePoint? How do people get knowledge of SharePoint? How do people use our SharePoint? People. And I want to kind of hammer that home. And to make that point, I mean, Gartner had a stat as part of that same study that basically was talking about how much information users get directly from other people. And so you can see right here, it's about people, right? Up to 75% of our information comes directly from someone else. So if we cut out people and how we're communicating, and I'm going to show you some cool ways to do that later, if we cut that piece out, then we sever all these different links between people, right? And so information can't flow, and I won't steal my thunder from later on, but suffice it to say that we need to focus on how people are going to communicate and not just create a fancy way for people to stay in their silos, right? Create a way for people to communicate. And again, and the last thing I'll show you on this stat, and I think it's always great to kind of see other people's perspective, this same one from Gartner is talking right here about how much focus on content and technology and not enough on kind of the change management, the leadership, the relationships, the business side of it, and the people side of it. And that's what these initiatives need. They're social in nature, they're collaborative. Both those words, social and collaborative, mean people, right? People have to be involved with those. So I can't push that hard enough that it really takes a lot to kind of keep people engaged, and you need to make people a huge focus. As we kind of come on the home stretch here of the disconnect pieces, I want to talk a little bit about this kind of taking your hands off the wheel, so to speak. And I use that analogy because there's a lot of ways you can go about this. And the way I often talk to prospects and clients is you can set the cruise control of your project, right? Once your project's up and going, you can set the cruise control. You can automate some processes to make the trip a little easier so you don't have to hold the gas pedal down and all those kind of things. But someone's still got to hold the steering wheel, right? Someone's still got to hold the steering wheel, and someone's still got to point us and drive us in the direction of where we're going. And so, you know, if I were to ask you guys a question, how many of you guys own a home? And then the next question I always like to ask is, now, how many of you guys don't have any projects left at your house, right? Everything's done, everything's taken care of, right? It's just absurd, right? I own a home, and there's always something to do. And it's the same thing with SharePoint. And we saw how generational changes are taking place. All these things are changing. And collaboration, if it's about people, and people are constantly changing throughout our organization and throughout history, then we can't just have SharePoint to be like Exchange or like one of these huge initiatives that just gets implemented and then sits on a shelf. And when you get to the end of it, you go, wipe your brow, and you're on to the next project. It doesn't work like that, and we see it time and time and time again where people come up to us and say, man, it was going great for the first year, but it's like a ghost town now. Nobody even uses it. We have like 2 people that log on to SharePoint and get some files now. And we see that time and time again, and it's sad because you've invested so much. It's a great technology. So this whole thing is about putting a process in place to continually improve on SharePoint, to continually make sure that things are moving forward, and that as we get through and we lay the foundation and we're building off from SharePoint, how do we make sure people continue to use it? What happens when we hire people next year? How do we make sure they know how to use it and they get to use it? How do we continue when people leave? People leave the organization for whatever reasons. They retire, they leave, they take another job. How do we continue to keep the momentum? What if it was a superstar with one of our SharePoint site owners and they leave? How do I keep that momentum? So thinking through, and that's what we spend a lot of time with clients in the roadmap, is thinking through how you're gonna keep your hands on the wheel and put these processes in place throughout time. And I'll talk more about that later on as we go through. And then the last thing I want to talk about from a disconnect standpoint is having an unbalanced view of governance. And I probably heard the collective gasp throughout the webinar, but we talk so much about governance, and a lot of you guys probably remember this little firm called Enron a few years ago that kind of we have to thank for all the governance and regulations and everything out there. But all of you guys, or a majority of you guys, are probably under some sort of regulation compliance, whether it's retention of documents, even if it's for taxes or whatever the purpose may be. But with so much talk on governance, and please hear me, we are pro-governance. We spend a ton of time with governance. We've even developed a governance toolkit that we sell to clients to help them kind of quick start their governance with templates and steering committee ideas in it and everything like that. So we have a lot of information, and we are huge on governance. But what's happened is we've heard all these things, and we've got this unbalanced view now of governance, and I'll talk about that and kind of what I mean from that. So some of you guys may or may not know that there are over 14,000 regulations and different types of standards and laws around just paper and electronic records, 14,000. My guess is I can guarantee that you guys don't need to implement every single one. And we see some organizations that have thousands or hundreds of different rules that they do it all the way down to check-in, check-out, and major and minor versions and all these kind of things. And a lot of people say, well, yeah, that's how we keep it nice and clean and governed. But here's what we're finding. And again, this goes back to kind of lessons learned and things we're seeing and to our point of not stopping, right, continually improving. That may have been true with the older generations and how we had to do it. But now people understand how to co-author. People understand these different technologies and not to write on someone or how to check these things. And so we've got different people using these tools, and there's a lot of different reasons. So what we've come up with is kind of a little bit different take on it. And we call this rigid at the core and flexible at the edges. And if you imagine your SharePoint as being this sphere with these different layers in it, the best way I can describe it, I'll put a little SharePoint logo on the sphere next time. But these inner layers are your core. And when I talk about core, I'm talking about your corporate metadata, your retention policies, what legal needs you to have in place, HIPAA, SOX, whatever it may be, your auditing, maybe your intranet homepage content that's really tightly managed, articles that are published specifically from the CEO or something like that. That's your non-negotiables, right? That's the things that need to be rigid at the core, and you got to stand by those because those are going to keep us out of court or something else, right? But then you've got these outer layers where people want to take this rigid at the core, and what they do is they kind of make this go throughout the entire organization. So even when you get out to OneDrive, it's, hey, you've only got this and you can only do that. And I understand quotas and those kind of things, but as you get further out, what you want to do is you want to make it a little more flexible. Have some things in there if there are some non-negotiables, like, yeah, we can't just let everybody have unlimited space. Well, I understand that. But when you start to look at OneDrive and your collaboration sites and check-in, check-out, and what keywords and personal views and all these little things that get down to, the document library and the list level, a lot of people take this governance and they apply it throughout. And one, that's going to make it a headache for whoever has to maintain that. Two, it's going to make it cumbersome and kind of a pain because people just don't work that way. People want to work the way they work. And so if I'm working on a project or a team site and it's kind of this ad hoc workspace that I'm working on, maybe for a couple months on just a short-term project, I don't want to have to go through all this thing, and it's going to make me not want to use it. If I have to go through a 10-step approval process to get that site, online and security and all those kind of things, I'm just going to go get me a Dropbox or a OneDrive account and just share my documents up there, right? So people are going to do it. People are going to find the path of least resistance. Give them a way that they can do it safely and securely on your platform. And that's what I mean by unbalanced governance, making sure that we have this balanced view of strict, but also, give people the flexibility to do what they need to do. So as we kind of transition here, and we move kind of from the disconnect and the struggles people are having to more of how we can get more out of SharePoint. I love what Einstein says, and it's one of my favorite quotes, is that we just can't use the same kind of thinking we used when we got into this mess, right? We've got to think differently, and that's what we try to do. That's where these sessions come from. We've got to think differently. If we keep thinking the same way, we're going to keep creating the same messes. So how do we think differently to get out of these? How are people changing? And that's what I want to focus on over the final 15, 20 minutes or so and talk about really a better way out of this. How can we better navigate SharePoint, and how can we, not have some of these failures and go through, and we'll leave the doom and gloom behind for a minute and talk about how we can get the most out of SharePoint. So let's wrap it up in the next 10 or 15 minutes, and then if you guys have any questions, feel free to submit those, and myself or Allison will try to answer those. So before I jump into some of the core reasons, I wanted to kind of show what we noticed as we started looking at these items of disconnect and where organizations were failing. So as we started to look at these areas, and this is the 6 things we just talked about on the screen here, as we started to look at those and started to figure them out, what we realized is that they actually fell into 2 different areas, 2 different categories, planning and control. And it's pretty interesting that if you look up here, and again, you could probably argue that, well, focusing on the tools is technology, but it's not really a thing not to focus on that, right? Up here, there's not really any heavy focus on technology implementation, right? And so over the next 15 minutes or so, my goal is to shed some light on these 6 areas and how they kind of break down and what you can do about them to address them, and provide some pretty practical ways. Some will be a little higher level in the strategy session, and some won't be, I'm not going to give you things like go into this list and change these settings and that'll do it. That's not what this session is about. I want to share things with you that you can go back and in your planning sessions and with your teams talk about, hey, these are some things we need to think about. But the first practical tip I want to give you guys is something we came up with that I call the 40-20-40 principle. And so this will just help you, again, one of those little nuggets you can take away, take a screenshot, whatever it is, and just help you reframe and almost like a little litmus test of how are we doing on this. So when we looked at the 60% of these people in these organizations that were coming back to us struggling with SharePoint, they had a similar makeup. Now, it's not going to be exactly, maybe it was shifted 20, 20, 60, whatever it is, right? So, they were off a little bit, but a majority of them were around this similar structure, right, this makeup. About 25% on the control, 25% on the planning, and about 50% on the technical implementation of the project. So, most of you guys would say, yeah, I know we need to do some planning. We need to get a project plan. We got to have some deadlines and milestones. And they spend about 25% of the collective time on that. And then control is, yeah, I know we need to have, a project, project management process, and we need to gather some requirements, and we need to make sure we're kind of training people and those kind of things. And then the rest of it is like, how do we get this stuff done? How do we build this? What we noticed is when we looked at this and we started working with clients and noticed this, we said, hey, what if we shifted this? And we know that these things fall into planning and control. What if we shifted this and made it look something more like this? And so what we came up with was this 40-20-40 principle. And again, I would say adapt to this, don't adopt it verbatim, right? So this may not be exactly for you, but the point of this slide is to help you guys see that there needs to be a shift, and you need to be spending 70 to 80% of your time on this planning and control. Do we have a roadmap? How are we going to do it? How are we going to do training? How are we going to do adoption? What happens when we hire 100 new people next year? How do those people learn? How do we keep this going? And it goes back to the whole taking your hands off the wheel. You can't just implement this one time and hope that it just continues to go, right? It's going to lose momentum if you're not driving it and keeping it going, and I'll talk about how to keep that momentum in just a minute. So this is just a quick way we came up with, and one tip I want to give you guys is just shift your focus to say 40% on control and planning and about 20% on your implementation, because honestly, at the end of the day, the implementation is some of the easier parts to do, right? All right, once we have the blueprint and once we have all the pieces done and the architect and everything, we can go out and build the house, right? Building the house, we see these houses go up in a month or so, right? They're fast, but it's all the planning to get you to that point that takes the most time. So over the next few minutes, and as we close this out, I want to try to answer the natural question you guys probably have right now, which is, if these 6 things are preventing organizations from getting more out of SharePoint, then how do we avoid them like the plague, right? How do we avoid those things? How do we make sure we're not doing those? So I came up with 3 keys or strategies, if you will, that I want to take away, because I want to make this really simple. I don't want this to be super complex, and hopefully you guys have already gotten some good nuggets out of this. But I want to keep this pretty simple, and I think these 3 things can solve all 6 of those plus some problems that you're going to run into, even beyond that. So if I were to boil this down, I would say it goes into these 3 things. 1, know where you're going. 2, think people, not product. And 3, forget about being done. If you can think about those 3 things and make those 3 things core of your planning process, you'll be so much further along, it'll amaze you, and you'll be so much further along than the competition and whoever else may be doing this. So let's jump right in and talk about these 3 things. So if we're going to go on vacation, right, if we're going to take a cross-country trip, I want to travel, we're here in North Carolina, I want to travel to Seattle and go out to the West Coast there in the Pacific. If you're going on vacation, traveling cross-country, you probably have a map, right? You probably know where you're going and probably have that. And you probably have all the roads marked on it. And obviously there's going to be detours that you couldn't determine ahead of time. So you got to make some detours and stop for an extra night if you didn't plan that. But you probably know about the general direction of the roads. where you'd stop along the way, and honestly, you'd probably even check the weather, right? You'd probably even check the weather to see exactly, how are we going to get there, and what is this, should we go north or south or whatever it is. And so why don't we do that with SharePoint projects, right? We tend to just start these things and say, let's just run and go. We got a punch list of requirements. It's about 1 or 2 pages in a Word document. Let's go start building this thing. And there's a lot more to it than that. To know where you are, what obstacles are going to lie in your way, what are we going to be up against, what kind of people are going to be using this? Do we know that much about our users and how they actually want to operate and work? So this will address a lot of things. And so what I want to do is kind of start with some pretty straightforward questions that you guys can see here. You guys can read these on the screen, but basically the who, what, when, where, why, and how, right? So as you guys go through it, again, easy questions. There's hundreds more questions. These aren't all inclusive. And some of you guys may be embarrassed and say, you know what, we've never even asked them these questions. But I would say don't be embarrassed. Don't worry about that, because you're not alone. That's why you're here. It's a good start. And we have lots of organizations that are saying we don't even ask that. So, what problems are we trying to solve? Where are we going with this? Why have other projects struggled in the past? I mean, it's nice to look at failures and why things have struggled, because guess what? 63% of these are struggling. So there's something in my organization that might cause other things to struggle. Maybe it's a person that's been on all those projects that are struggling. Maybe they're sabotaging it. Look at those kind of things and ask those questions, and then how can we make it easier to work together? And I'll talk about some of these as we go on as well. This number 3 here, when will we be ready for collaboration? One of the things, and I'll talk about this at the very end for those that are on at the end, but I'm going to send you three downloadable links, 3 downloadable assets, and send you some links in an email probably tomorrow for everybody that's on the session here for some things that will help you, and we'll address them. And one of those that I want to send to you guys is what we call this collaboration assessment. It's really a readiness assessment for collaboration. So quickly, I'll go through this and kind of show you, but I'm going to give you a link where you can actually download this as a PDF and take it to your organization and kind of run it here. So answering those questions is a great start, but obviously we want to do a little bit more and see how likely our success is. So this isn't scientific. It's kind of a quick and dirty way, but it's pretty amazing how accurate sometimes it is. So how this works: you guys answer the first 4 questions up there in the top left. Answer them honestly about your organization, and remember that number or circle it kind of in your head for that first bar. Second question is there in the bottom middle. Answer those questions. How many did you answer? So if you answered 3 of the first one and 2 of the second one, you circle 3 and 2. Then you draw a line between those where it intersects the orange line. And I'll show you how this kind of works by using some extremes. So if I said, hey, I got 4 of the first one and 0 of the second one, then our likelihood of SharePoint success, forget about technology, forget about the team we have, all those kind of things, our likelihood is very low. If I've got 2 of each, I'm probably on track to be about average. We're probably going to be in the 50-60% success range. And if I've got none of the first and 4 of the second, then it's going to be very high, right? So again, use this however you want, but answer these questions. And again, not scientific, but it'll give you a quick gauge of, hey, where are we? So you guys have probably done that while I was going through it. I'll give you a downloadable one, because sometimes this is great to take to a sponsor, project sponsor, whoever's going to do it, and we'll give you the PDF where you guys can take this and use it and try to come up with it and say, hey, look, if we cut out 2 of these, we're going to be much better off. How do we address those? And that's part of what this is addressing. A lot of these things are cultural things that go back to it, because if your culture is not right and you don't have a culture of sharing and collaborating and working together, no tool is magically going to fix that. SharePoint's not magically going to fix it. So that's what we want to do with this slide here. Now, I love this quote by Covey, and some of you guys may have seen it, and it basically says, just forget about goals. If you've got goals, which are great, hey, I want an intranet, I want SharePoint, that's a great goal, pretty broad, but it's a great goal. But if you don't have a specific plan to achieve that goal, it's just pure fantasy, right? Just forget about setting the goal. So what I want you guys to do is have a goal and have a plan to actually take you there and get you there. The next thing I want to talk about is think people, not product, right? And this is really, again, focusing on your people, not your tool. Who should be on our project team? What do people need to do their jobs better? What rules do people need in place? What is our governance for that? How should we manage the expectations of our users? Do we even know what their expectations are? Are some people expecting it to be a success? Are some people hoping it secretly is a failure? How do you uncover those? And again, it goes back to people, 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 people. One of the things I want to show you guys that's part of this is that, and I've already talked about it, right? People are at the heart of collaboration. I always like showing this slide, because it shows really how collaboration happens inside of an organization. A lot of people don't think this way, and again, I'm thinking outside of even SharePoint, but if people are going to use your SharePoint, this is how they're going to work. The way people work together is you start forming connections. You start bringing people together, making it easy for people to work together, friction-free. Then relationships are formed, right? Then people start to build bonds, and they're like, oh, I look forward to working with Tom and Mary and whoever it is on that project. And they become natural. And then what happens is you have employee engagement. This is where people say, oh, wow, you know, I look forward to coming in. My guess is you don't look forward to coming in and using that new HP printer or that fancy laptop. You know, you probably come in because you like what you do. You want to work with people, those kind of things. So this is where engagement happens, is once you get these relationships formed. And then the final kind of collaboration nirvana where we all want to get to is this last step of collaboration, innovation, ideas are being generated, you know, new customer service ideas, better efficient processes, more customers, new products, all those kind of things that come out of this force. But if any one of these are broken, and we don't have people connecting, we don't have people making it easy for them to build relationships, then you never get to this fourth step. And so one of the things we naturally asked when we saw this are, you know, are all connections created equally? And what we found out was that they're really not. And I want to talk about this. I think this is a really cool concept, and I hope you guys, most of you guys are still on and hear this. And some of you guys may have heard about this already. There was a sociologist in the 70s called Mark Granovetter who talked about this, and you can go out there and Google him on strong ties and weak ties. And I just want to kind of paint a picture here. So let's just talk for a minute and look at these and say these are the departments of our organization, our fictitious organization. Maybe you guys have some of these, maybe you guys have all of these, maybe you guys have more, I'm sure, or less. So these are our departments. And let's assume that there are strong ties between these groups. And strong ties are really people you work with every day, people you sit beside, people that you're close with, even on a personal side, your relatives, your best friends, your spouse, whatever it may be. We have a certain amount of strong ties. And I don't know about you guys, but I can probably count all of my close friends on one hand, right? We tend to have fewer of these strong ties because they take a lot of effort to maintain, and we want to keep up on them, so we don't have as many of those. And so what happens in an organization is these strong ties are formed between marketing, legal, finance, engineering, and IT. And what it starts to do is it starts to form these clusters in your organization, right? So you start to have these clusters of information, and the ones that aren't in these clusters are kind of clusters in and of themselves. So now we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 silos of information, so to speak, in these clusters that are kind of isolated between them. So what Mark Granovetter found is that this concept of the weak ties can kind of build these bridges between networks. And I'll promise I'll kind of bring it back down to earth and kind of talk about how this makes more sense. So let's say, for instance, we wanted to connect logistics with legal. For some reason, maybe they're working on a new policy for faster shipping or whatever it may be, right? So we bring them together. Or maybe for your organization, it works better if you have marketing connected to logistics. Maybe you find a way for them to work together with a new sales piece or something like that. So you find ways for these guys to work together, and maybe not even finding a way to work together. Maybe just giving them the platform, SharePoint, team sites, an easy way, friction-free way, where they don't have to go through 100 steps to request a new site, but an easy way for logistics and marketing to kind of work together and reach out. That's what I'm saying here from a practical standpoint. What happens is now we've immediately opened up logistics, not just to marketing, but to this other network of legal, finance, and those kind of things. And this is where information starts to flow. And I know it's hard sometimes to visualize, like, yeah, does that really happen? It really happens inside of an organization like that. And it may just be one person that goes from marketing to finance or legal from logistics, but that one person can then start spreading a seed. So if we look at the other side, then maybe we connect HR to logistics, right? So maybe HR is planning a huge annual party, and we go through that process, and they, they find out that they want to use logistics. Well, just by doing that, we connect these groups together, and then the clusters start to go away. So what we end up with is this information flow that kind of flows through our organization, and will then, get us with this information flowing and ideas generating and going through it. So there's a lot on this topic. I could probably do a whole session on this topic, but I want to get through this, and I know we only have 4 or 5 minutes left to go through this. So forming these weak ties, giving people an opportunity to connect and think about who can I connect that's not working. So I would challenge you guys to identify the clusters that are in your organization that don't talk to each other. That would be a great place to start. This next thing I want to talk about, and then we're going to wrap up in the next couple minutes, is really, we talked about people being at the heart, and one of the things that we like to do is what we call prepare and proclaim. And this is really important, and this is pretty easy to remember. But again, if we're going to equip our people for success, then one of the things, they need to be prepared. They need to understand what they're using. and we need to let them know about what it is we're doing. And so on these two sides, quickly I'll go through these, and basically we found that people use what they understand, right? No one's going to go out there and just magically use, and you have some trendsetters and people that are out there and jumping on the emerging technologies, but for the most part, people aren't going to use what they don't understand. Just let me do it the old way. Creating ambassadors and champions, creating these seeds that can then go out there in your organization. And then the last thing on the preparation and the training side is start early and repeat. We start training in parallel with phase one. A lot of people and a lot of organizations in the past think, hey, when we get done with this project, we'll roll out phase one, and then next thing you know, we'll do a training session, and then everybody's trained. But what happens when you hire 100 people next year or 10 people next month? How do those people get trained? What is your process for continually training those? Is it an ambassador that trains them? Do they have the tip sheets and the resources to train those? So how do we create a repeatable process to keep people engaged and trained up on SharePoint? And then on the proclaim side, spread the news. Come up with ways to do it. We develop communication plans as part of our roadmap process with our organizations to help them know, is it banners and posters in the break room? Is it an email from a stakeholder? Is it an email from the project manager? Is it something we send out on the homepage as a blast? Where does the news come from? When does it get sent? From whom does it come? Getting people involved, telling people, hey, here's how you give us feedback. Here's how you get involved with this project, and then give it an easy way to provide feedback. And I'll show that in just 1 minute with the feedback piece. So those are just some easy ways from a people standpoint. And the last thing I want to talk about is kind of forget being done. Never stop. Always make sure. And I know we're getting close on time, and I want to make sure we wrap this up in time for you guys to run to your next meetings. But what I would say in this is when you're doing your plan, don't use end dates, use milestones. SharePoint should never be done. Even when it's done, we have our steering committees and our governance teams. They meet at least every quarter. Some even want us to meet every month, even forever, right? They don't have an end date on those, and we just continue to meet and make sure. And those are the ones that are doing the best. So I love this quote by William Edwards Deming that basically says, you really don't have to change. You guys can continue doing what you want to do. You can continue doing things the way all your other projects at your organization have done. Change isn't necessary, but if you want SharePoint to survive and be better, you might consider kind of changing how you think about it and going about it a little bit differently. And as I kind of wind this up, I want to share a quick stat just on this steering committee multi-departmental. This is one easy way that you guys can quickly add a lot of value is just developing the steering committee. We've got a lot of tips and resources and out there for helping you develop a leadership team. I've got a blog out there on it, but there's actually been AIM said that there's a 30% increase in project success when you have a multi-departmental steering committee. So it's definitely something that you guys should have. Put it in place early, probably even now as you're starting to do these projects. And the last thing I want to share with you guys on getting feedback is this tool that we built. And this is one of the downloads that I'll send you guys that are still on here after the session's over. It's basically a feedback solution for SharePoint 2013, and we've got one for 2010 as well. You install it on a site collection level, so the site collection administrator can install it on their level, and it creates this feedback link at the top on the bar. You click it, it pops a dialog on the same page you're on, you enter your comments, and then it goes into a list, and you can set alerts on that list, permissions, however you want to. But it's really cool because it's a quick way to get feedback from your users, and we found it to be tremendously valuable with adoption and just getting feedback, and then the steering committee can prioritize that feedback. Because people are not, whether you tell them to or not, they're not going to stop what they're doing because they're already task focused in SharePoint. Stop what they're doing, shift over to email or write it down, go back and email Susie on the project team to here's something I found in feedback that's going to get lost in her email box. People want this easy way. So this has been an easy way. I'm going to give you this for free for those that came to the webinar today. So you guys will be able to install this, and hopefully it'll help with your projects. And with that, I'll kind of close with this. Those of you that are really struggling with failure, I love quotes, and this is a great one, and nobody struggled more before success than Henry Ford, right? So for those that are struggling, I mean, reach out to us. I mean, if there's any way, if there's a blog we can point you to, if there's any way we can engage with you guys, we engage with clients to help them through the entire cycle, roadmaps, or we can help you just kind of get pointed in the right direction. And maybe it's just a Sherpa plan to say, hey, we got all the right people. Can you just come alongside and kind of guide us so we don't go off in the ditch? So don't worry about it, because failure really is the opportunity to begin again. And you guys have an opportunity. Hopefully there were some good nuggets in here for you guys to get out of this. For those that are still on, I just want to share with you real quick. You can always go to events.c5insight.com. Feel free to look at our webinars, to figure out what's going on. We're going to have a ton out there. There's 2 conferences. If you haven't gone, this Collab 365 conference, it's a free conference. Go sign up. Go Google Collab 365. It's free. I'll be delivering a session there on 7 Deadly Sins of SharePoint. SharePoint Engage for those in the East Coast here in Raleigh is another one in Raleigh or Greensboro in October. I'll be delivering a session there as well. But the Cloud 365 is a free session. It's all virtual. You don't have to go anywhere. It's all online over a 24-hour period. It's following the sun across the world. It's pretty cool. But you're always going to find those. Sign up for our RSS, and you can be notified of the events. And please respond to the survey that you get. I'd love to know that, was there anything valuable in here? Was it a waste of your time? When you guys close out a GoToMeeting, you'll get an invite with that. And I know I went a couple minutes over, not too bad, and had to kind of go through the last part pretty quickly, but I hope this was valuable for you guys. And if you ever want to reach out, again, I'll put some contact information up on the screen. You guys probably know how to get a hold of us because you signed up for the webinar, but reach out to us. We'd love to hear where you are in your journey. Appreciate you taking an hour out of your day. It really means a lot, and really says a lot for what you guys want to do with your SharePoint. So with that, I appreciate everything, and thank you guys for joining today.